Welcome back. As the race for the coronavirus vaccine continues, federal leaders are starting to imagine the government after the virus. A group of former chief information officers has a vision for a post-pandemic, digitally centered government. Mark Forman's vice president of digital government strategy for SAIC. He's former eGov administrator at the Office of Management and Budget. Mark, before we begin, I want to shout out to your colleagues, Alan Balutis, John Gilligan, Dan Mintz, and Gloria Parker, who collaborated with you on this project. And I know the themes that all of them have been talking about for a number of years. And what struck me as I read through this is that except for the references to the pandemic and the way that it's impacted the federal government, the themes that are in here are the themes that all of you have been talking about for years. That's a good thing, isn't it? That means that this message of what the post-virus government landscape looks like should be fairly clear to people, isn't it?
Absolutely. Now, a couple of things to build on what you've said. First of all, I should say that the five of us came together under the CIO SAIC group at the Partnership for Public Service. We're looking at a number of papers that different groups have been putting out, and most of us participating in those groups, around how agencies should adapt in transition to the next administration, what the pandemic means. And we decided that there was a gap in the discussion around how do you operationalize some of these recommendations. So we really focused the paper on catalyzing the discussion, focusing in on things like how do you take cost out, how do you mine the insights on some of the responses the agencies have had, especially the innovations as a result of the pandemic. And I think the thing that is really new here is that the pandemic has created a lot of innovation and a lot of opportunities that are paradigm shifters, and we didn't have that paradigm shift before. People thought of telework as kind of a luxury, as opposed to the nature of the way people will be doing their work in the future.
There's a lot more here that we could discuss than we have time to discuss it, so I want to get to some of the things that really jumped out at me, that really struck me, Mark. You and your colleagues write, government managers should motivate employees to become excited and actively engage in helping design and implement changes that the organization needs to be more efficient and provide better services to citizens. I think what we learn from the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey every year is that employees have wanted to do that for a long time. Why is now the right time to do it, or is it just a matter of today's the second best time, yesterday was the best time?
Right. Well, look, there are certain things that people have said for years, going back to the Paperwork Elimination Act and some of the e-government initiatives, and internal cultural resistance or interpretations of laws have resisted. The notion, for example, now of getting a wet signature and requiring on different forms wet signature seems archaic in the notion of how people are doing their work at home, leveraging virtual workspaces, online document workflows. So things that have been mandated for years, like electronic signatures, are now on the table as the norm, as almost the only way to do the work. And there's a lot more innovations that are coming out of the pandemic. We need those to bubble up as opposed to the discussions coming top down.
You and your colleagues write in this a lot about, I don't know if the right word is digitization or digitalization or what the semantics are, but for example, you write about the need to transition from thinking about modernizing the buildings to modernizing the work environments and transforming the work environments. What's the difference in mindset that that's going to require for a leader in this environment?
Well, I think number one is performance management. The notion that the workforce is focused on outcomes and goals, which again, a lot of us have talked about for years, but now this has to go all the way down into supervision. And instead of thinking about how much time you're at your desk or running down the hall to get approval, what's the best way to get that work done by focusing on outcomes? And by the same token, we know that this is going to require some IT investment. So I was just in a government office on Friday. It's pretty dark. And you wonder, how long can we sustain those capital investments? At some point, people now know the paradigm shifted. We don't need these large government office buildings for people to get their work done. You need them for collaboration, but let's look at taking the cost out of capital structures that are no longer needed and leveraging that to build on the innovations.
I know that you're an IT guy, and but I know you well enough to know that you're also a very smart business person, and I wonder what the financial management shift will be that's required to move from a CapEx to an OpEx type budget worldview.
Right, well, the cloud, as you know, I've been talking about for 10 years, and this is coming now to multiple aspects of government, I think more rapidly. It's been building and building. But the paradigm shift brought about by the pandemic now requires other innovations. And I think you mentioned digitization and digitalization. The amount of workflows that still were paper-based, granted they were electronic forms of paper, but they were paper-based, that now can leverage new technologies, virtualized environments, robotic process automation, freeing up the government employee to really work on where they can leverage their knowledge and their expertise is a key part of what we're talking about.
We have 20 seconds left, Mark. What's the most important thing that a government leader should do between now and the swearing in of President-elect Biden to make sure that they're ready to implement the kind of vision that you and your colleagues are outlining?
I think active engagement of the workforce. We've got to mine the innovations and opportunities that the pandemic brought about to spread and take bigger advantage of those within the agency and then ultimately across agencies.
Mark Forman, thanks very much as always.
Thank you, Francis. Good to talk with you.